It seems to me that one of the most striking things about the feelings about Paul Tsongas are so many people say the same thing. His supporters and the disinterested press seem to have reached a consensus. And even those supporting another candidate seem to start off their remarks by saying, before lapsing into an argument for another candidate, oh, sure, maybe he's the most substantive, maybe he's been around the longest, maybe he's been worried about the economy longer than the others, maybe he's the most decent, maybe he's not a political opportunist, and maybe he's deeply respected. But it seems to me that that is damning this man with extravagant praise. Think of another political candidate about whom that was said by the adversary. And if all that is true about this candidate, it seems to me all of us should draw nigh and listen.
Pundits scoffed at the chances of this apparent Michael Dukakis clone. But Tsongas, the only announced Democratic candidate for president in 1992, is no Michael Dukakis. Tsongas describes himself as a pro-business liberal. Like George Bush, he supports cuts in the capital gains tax rate, but not as extensively as does Bush. Unlike many Democrats, Tsongas also believes in the death penalty and in nuclear power. Analysts say Tsongas is a long shot at best. Critics say he lacks charisma. Mavens mention Tsongas' earlier cancer, now in remission, as an obstacle to his campaign. But the former Democratic senator appears to be in excellent health and is a nationally competitive swimmer. Does Paul Tsongas have any chance of becoming president? What impact will he have on the campaign, even if he doesn't win? We'll ask him. Born Lowell, Massachusetts, 50 years of age. Wife, Nikki, 3 children, Greek Orthodox. Dartmouth College BA, Yale Law School, Doctor of Laws. Peace Corps, 3 years, West Indies and Ethiopia. Massachusetts Deputy Assistant Attorney General, 2 years. Massachusetts Middlesex County Commissioner, 2 years. U.S. House of Representatives, Massachusetts 5th District, 4 years. U.S. Senate, Massachusetts, 6 years. Resigned from Senate 1984 upon learning that he had lymphoma, cancer of the lymph nodes, from which he later recovered. Author, 2 books, The Road from Here and Heading Home, a chronicle of his bout with cancer. Foley, Hoag, and Elliott Law Firm, partner and counsel, 6 years and currently. 1992 presidential election, candidate for the Democratic nomination, 10 days and currently. Paul Euphemius Tsongas. It's one-on-one. Paul Tsongas, why do you think that voters ought to turn out George Bush, turn him out of office?
I think the voters like him personally. There's no doubt about that. They applaud what he did in the Persian Gulf. But if you ask people, how are our cities doing? How's the economy doing relative to Japan, relative to Germany? How are the schools doing? How's the environment doing? People are not happy. And I think you have to hold the Reagan-Bush years accountable for what has happened during their tenure, particularly on the economic issues.
So those are his vulnerabilities.
Economics is the major vulnerability. People know the economic ground is trembling beneath them, and they want answers. Most Democrats have got to understand that in the long term, it is the private sector, the marketplace, which has the enormous economic engine. So if you want to bring about change, what you have to do long term is to bring into the discussion how you make the private sector invest, and particularly in the manufacturing base, which I think is the Achilles heel of this country until we get our act together.
I agree with Paul. Over the long run, we need a big investment strategy.
Let me tell you the taxes I would propose. One would be a 3rd-tier income tax to pay dollar for dollar for what I lose on my capital gains tax cut. So whatever I lose on the capital gains to bring about investments into industries, I would make up for 3rd-tier income tax, dollar for dollar. Secondly, I would have a 3 to 5 cent a year increase in the gasoline tax for infrastructure. There's no question the United States has to make a massive effort, as the New York Times pointed out today, to reinvent, to reinvigorate its infrastructure. So that tax I would be in favor of. In terms of a broad income tax across the board, the freeze. You cap your expenditures and you allow revenues to catch up to it long term.
And how long will that take?
what you would have is a situation where the money markets would understand that you're in a situation where these lines are converging, so long-term interest rates would come down. No one's going to balance the budget in a matter of 2 or 3 years, given the massive nature of the Reagan-Bush deficits.
What are the key ideas that you're focusing on right now?
Well, the fundamental idea is economics. The United States is not competing with its allies, Japan, Germany. The result of that inevitably is a decline in the American standard of living. And the only reason we're not talking about a catastrophe economically in the United States today is because the Japanese and the Germans are willing to buy our debt. So we have, in essence, an American lifestyle that is funded by the willingness of outsiders to, A, buy up the country, and secondly, finance our massive debt. That's not going to continue. At some point, there will be a kind of economic Sputnik incident to bring everybody to focus on economics, but I see my job initially as a kind of economic Paul Revere, trying to make the country understand the economic peril, and like Paul Revere, bring the country into some kind of commitment to address the problem.
Paul's got a terrific industrial policy.
Senator Tsongas, you say no tax cut. It's something that people in your party and Congress are certainly talking about doing pretty quick. What do you think is, why are you on the opposite end of this?
Well, my position is the same as the New York Times, the same as Business Week, the same as economist John Kenneth Galbraith on the left and Alan Greenspan on the right. The argument for the middle-class tax cut is coming from the media consultants, the polling data. 97 cents a day does not do a thing to invest in this country. If you want to spend $30 billion, you're either going to take it by more debt or you take it out of other programs. The fundamental requirement is to get the manufacturing base viable and competitive and thriving. And the problem with the tax cut is what's happening now is there's a sense that the Democrats are going to do it. So what does George Bush do? He wants to do the same thing. So what we have now is the promise of much higher deficits down the road, and now you begin to see long-term interest rates begin to climb. Why? Not because the economy is coming back, because the markets fear that you're going to have a bidding war where the Democrats and the Republicans are going to bid against each other to cut those taxes that have no impact on competitiveness, and that over the long term is disastrous for everybody.
On this middle income tax break that Governor Clinton and Senator Kerry are talking about, I agree with Paul Tsongas on this. He's absolutely right on this issue.
Talking about the party, some people look at Paul Tsongas and say, well, defeating the Republicans is your second goal. The first one is changing the Democratic Party, what it is and where it's headed. Is that a precondition for victory in '92?
Yes. I view it in 3 stages. One, what I referred to as the economic Paul Revere stage. I guess looking for a Massachusetts politician I can relate to favorably. So economic Paul Revere, alert the country to the economic threat, make them understand the economic peril, move into the Democratic Party, change the party into a pro-economic growth, pro-economic nationalism, pro-economic patriotism mode without abandoning our liberal traditions.
You want to make the party more pro-business.
I want to make the party aggressively more pro-business, to understand that the great threat to this nation is economic. And the Democratic Party has no economic policy worthy of the name. It's going to go into 1992 as a populist, class warfare, protectionist, that kind of a mode which doesn't add one job to the American economy. I call that Twinkie economics. Twinkies taste great, have no nutritional value. That's what the Democrats, left to their own devices, will give the American people in 1992, and that's no better.
Do you expect to be a pretty popular figure in your own party saying all of this? Some people are saying, hey, who needs a second Republican Party with Paul Tsongas? We already have one.
I'm pro-choice. Republicans are not. I authored the gay rights bill. Few Republicans, if any, sign on to that. I was probably the strongest environmentalist the Senate has ever seen. I did the Alaska Lands bill, so I'm not a Republican. But I understand. I grew up in a situation of decline, economic decline in my home city. I know what it's like to live in that circumstance. And my definition of a liberal is someone who will expand the economic pie. Those who give us all the rhetoric but don't add one new job to the economy. That's not liberalism in my definition.
And Senator Tsongas, you are said to be boring, not good on television, although people can judge for themselves tonight, and a Greek from Massachusetts, and the Democrats tried that one time. Didn't work very well.
Well, I'm Greek and I'm proud of it. George Bush was born in Massachusetts. He never apologized for it, and I'm not going to until he does first. Okay?
You mentioned you need to spend time strategizing. Fundraising obviously always also plays a big part in this. What is the fundraising aspect of this like?
Fundraising is never pleasant. That's true if you talk about a city council race or you talk about running for the presidency. And in my case, I'm not taking PAC money. And I can tell you that it's not an easy decision because there is, with the recession and my not having office these days compared to 7 years ago, it is much more difficult. But I think the whole issue of PAC money is going to be a major issue in this campaign. And by committing not to take PAC money, I'm trying to set a standard. So those who would not meet that standard hopefully can be brought to account for that.
What's your real goal in this run?
Besides winning,
Is it winning? Is that your number one goal?
if you don't want
If
to...
the odds are so great, what's your real goal?
My goal is to change the Democratic Party, alert the American people to the economic peril, and be president of the United States and turn this country's economy around.